As the Catholic Church prepares to canonize its first millennial saint, a storm has erupted around the young man, affectionately dubbed God's influencer. Carlo Acutis, a 15-year-old who died of leukemia in 2006, is set to become a saint later this month. But just as the Church prepares to celebrate his holiness, a disturbing trend rooted in greed has cast a shadow over the joy. Someone tried to auction off his hair online. Yes, his hair. An anonymous vendor listed strands of what were claimed to be Acutis's hair for sale online, and in a matter of hours, bidding reportedly soared past $2,200. It was the kind of auction that might have slipped under the radar in the depths of the internet, if not for one thing. Archbishop Domenico Sorrentino, who oversees the Diocese of Assisi where Acutis's body rests, saw the listing, and he didn't stay silent. Instead, he filed a formal police complaint demanding that the auction be taken down and investigated. The listing was swiftly removed, but the damage had already been done. What was supposed to be a holy and historic moment, a teenager elevated to sainthood for his digital devotion and deep faith, was now tinged with controversy, greed, and possible fraud. The Archbishop was clear in his statement, "We do not know whether the relics are real or false, but even if it were all invented, we would be in the presence of not only a scam, but also an insult to religious sentiment." And as the Church turns its attention to St. Peter's Square for the April 27th canonization, a deeper question now lingers. What happens when holiness becomes merchandise? To understand why the attempted sale of Carlo Acutis's hair stirred such swift and serious response, we have to turn to a centuries-old tradition, one deeply rooted in Catholic spirituality. Relics, whether they are strands of hair, pieces of bone, or even articles of clothing worn by saints, are considered precious links between heaven and earth. They are not magical trinkets. They are reminders, powerful physical connections to lives of virtue, sacrifice, and holiness. And in the case of someone like Carlo Acutis, whose short life touched millions, a relic holds even greater emotional power. But while relics inspire prayer and veneration, Church law draws a hard line when it comes to their treatment. Canon law explicitly forbids the sale of relics. It is not a suggestion. It is a commandment of reverence. Relics may be gifted by a bishop, a religious order, or family members of the deceased, but they are never to be bought or sold for money. The logic is clear. The holiness of a saint cannot be reduced to a commodity. The grace associated with their life cannot be auctioned off like an autograph or antique. Archbishop Sorrentino echoed this clearly in his video statement. "What can the idol of money lead to? I fear that Satan has a hand in it." His words may sound severe, but they reflect the seriousness of the offense. Turning the sacred into a business is more than a crime. It's a desecration. To some, a relic might look like a piece of hair in a glass case, but to the faithful, it's a silent sermon. And selling that's not just illegal, it's sacrilege. For Archbishop Domenico Sorrentino, this wasn't just about enforcing church law, it was personal. As the shepherd of the Diocese of Assisi, Sorrentino has been closely connected to the legacy of Carlo Acutis from the very beginning. It was under his watch that Acutis's body was laid to rest in Assisi, the home of St. Francis himself. And it is within his diocese that the world now makes pilgrimage to see the incorrupt body of a teenager who brought Christ to the digital world. To him, Acutis is not just a future saint. He is a son of the diocese, a symbol of hope for a generation longing for purity, meaning, and faith in a virtual world filled with distraction and temptation. So, when he learned that someone had dared to place what was allegedly Carlo's hair on the auction block, and for money, Sorrentino responded not only with canonical authority, but with paternal sorrow. "We do not know whether the relics are real or false," he said, "but even if it were all invented, we would be in the presence of not only a scam, but also an insult to religious sentiment." His words cut deep, because this was more than an internet stunt. This was the commercialization of grace. A boy who had spent his life using the internet to bring souls closer to the Eucharist was now being used in that same space for profit. That irony was not lost on Sorrentino, and neither was the danger. He feared not only for Carlo's memory, but for what this incident revealed, that the hunger for profit can twist even the holiest of stories. And in his eyes, this wasn't just about fraud, it was spiritual warfare. "I fear that Satan has a hand in it," he warned, and coming from a man who has spent years watching thousands kneel before Carlo's tomb, that warning was not made lightly. What shocked Archbishop Sorrentino the most about the Carlo Acutis relic auction was not just the item itself, but how common such sales have quietly become. Behind the polished facade of Catholic websites and faith-based forums lies a troubling underground, an active digital marketplace where holy relics, real or fake, are bought and sold like collector's coins. Listings for the bones of obscure saints, strands of hair, or even supposed fragments of the true cross often appear in dark corners of the internet, and sometimes even on major online marketplaces before they're flagged and removed. Sorrentino didn't mince words when speaking about it. There is a market of relics that concern various saints, such as our Francis of Assisi, with a price list. "Something impossible to accept," he said, his voice tinged with sorrow. And he's right. For centuries, relics were carefully protected and entrusted only to churches and clergy. But the rise of online anonymity and the global thirst for spiritual memorabilia has given birth to a disturbing trend, one where scammers capitalize on the faith of others, offering sacred objects for steep prices with no way to prove their origin. It's a problem made worse by the modern era's obsession with celebrity and possession, a desire not just to admire holiness, but to own it. Carlo Acutis, tragically, fits that modern mold too well. He's young, he's relatable, he's digital. In a world desperate for new saints and viral inspiration, his image has spread far beyond church walls. And that reach has a dark side. It invites exploitation. In trying to make holiness more accessible, the Church has walked a fine line. Now, with Acutis poised to become the first millennial saint, that line is being tested like never before. Before the auctions, before the canonization buzz, before the scandals and headlines, there was just Carlo, a teenager with messy hair, a shy smile, and a laptop covered in stickers. He loved soccer. He loved Pokemon, and above all, he loved Jesus in the Eucharist. Born in 1991 and gone by 2006, Carlo lived only 15 years. But what a life they were. Diagnosed with M3 fulminant leukemia, his suffering was brief but intense. Yet, even as his body grew weaker, his spirit only burned brighter. "I'm happy to die," he once said, "because I lived my life without wasting a minute on things that don't please God." What made Carlo different wasn't just his faith, it was how he shared it. He used the internet, not to show off or escape, but to evangelize. He created an entire website cataloging Eucharistic miracles from around the world, complete with photographs, explanations, and devotionals. This wasn't a school project. It was his mission. He understood something that many adults still wrestle with, that technology is a tool, not a curse, and that holiness could live online if one used it the right way. That's why the Church has already dubbed him the patron saint of the internet, and why youth from every continent see him as one of their own. But that sacred image, the relatable saint, the digital missionary, is exactly what makes the relic auction so disturbing. It flips his entire legacy on its head. Carlo gave away his time, his talent, his comfort, even his life. And now someone tried to profit from what he left behind, his literal hair, as if his holiness could be hoarded or sold. Carlo didn't want to be famous. He wanted to make Jesus famous. And if we're not careful, this canonization could become more about spectacle than sanctity, unless we remember who he really was. On April 27th, 2025, St. Peter's Square will overflow with pilgrims, young and old, holding smartphones in one hand and rosaries in the other. Giant screens will flash with Carlo Acutis' face, not the face of a medieval martyr or cloistered monk, but of a teenager in a windbreaker and jeans. For the first time in church history, a millennial will be declared a saint, and with him, an entire generation will feel seen. But beneath the hymns and applause lies a quiet responsibility, one the Church cannot ignore. Because while the world celebrates Carlo's sainthood, others are circling like vultures. People are watching not for miracles, but for memorabilia, and the attempted auction of his hair was only the beginning. If the Church does not act swiftly and clearly, his canonization could mark not just the rise of a modern saint, but the birth of a modern scandal. Archbishop Sorrentino's warning was more than a defense of relics. It was a cry to preserve something sacred in a world that monetizes everything. Carlo Acutis gave everything freely: his talents, his time, his testimony. His sanctity was never for sale. It cannot be allowed to become merchandise. The Church, in honoring Carlo, must also shield him from idolization, from commercial exploitation, and from digital distortion. He was not a celebrity. He was a servant. His canonization is not content. It's a call. And for the young people watching around the world, for whom faith is often tangled in noise, doubt, and screens, this moment matters. They are looking for something real, something pure, something true. In Carlo, they may just find it, but only if we let his story stay holy, not hollow.